I took this job to find peace. Just me, the trees, and the endless silence of the Washington wilderness. But lately, the silence feels wrong. Something is out there, watching me from the forest below. It was supposed to be a quiet summer job. Just me, a tower, and miles of untouched forest. No people, no noise, just the wind and the trees. But a few weeks in, I started hearing things. Footsteps, where there shouldn't be any. Whispers on the radio that no one else could hear. And last night I realized, whatever's out there, it knows exactly where I am. 3 months ago, I saw something on Mount Rainier that still keeps me awake at night. I've tried to explain it to friends, to investigators, even to myself. But the more I talk about it, the less real it sounds. Maybe that's why I'm telling it here, the way it happened. No edits, no embellishment, because if I don't, it'll keep eating away at me. My name's Eli Turner, and for the past 3 summers, I have worked as a fire lookout for Mount Rainier National Park. It's not a glamorous job, no crowds, no cell service, no comfort, but it gave me what I thought I wanted most: silence. After 10 years as a firefighter in Tacoma, I'd had my fill of noise, sirens shouting, flames crackling through neighborhoods, the sound of people begging for help you couldn't give. The mountains promised peace, but peace is a tricky thing. Spend enough time alone in it, and you start hearing what silence is trying to hide. I remember the first morning of that season like it was yesterday, June 5th. The air smelled sharp, cold, and clean, the kind that burns a little when you breathe too deep. I hiked up to the Summit Ridge Lookout, a narrow tower perched above miles of pine forest. From up there, the trees looked endless, waves of green rolling down into mist and shadow. I logged my arrival with headquarters over the radio. Summit Ridge, this is Turner, arriving for duty, all clear, over. Grace Dalton's voice came back, steady and familiar. Copy that, Eli. Welcome back to your mountain. Forecast looks calm this week. Don't get too comfortable. Grace had been my supervisor for 3 years, the kind of woman who could sound cheerful while tracking a lightning storm heading straight for you. She was the last voice I'd hear most nights before shutting the radio off. That first day passed like most others. Routine checks, scanning the horizon through binoculars, noting humidity and wind speed, recording the shapes of clouds. The rhythm of it always steadied me. Every hour, a new entry in the log. Every 6 hours, a weather call to base. Nothing unexpected until the second night. The sun had barely dipped below the horizon when I heard it, the faint buzz of the radio waking up on its own. I hadn't touched it. The volume knob was turned down low, but through the static, I thought I heard my own name. Eli Turner. I froze. The radio hissed and went quiet again. I checked the channel, still on the standard frequency. Probably just crossfeed, I told myself. Weather interference happens all the time. I wrote it off. But when you're 20 miles from another human being, even static can sound like a whisper. That night, sleep didn't come easy. The tower creaked in the wind like something breathing in its sleep. I stared at the ceiling and told myself I'd get used to the noises again. I always did. Still, around 2 a.m., I found myself sitting at the desk, logging notes I didn't need to make. Winds southwest, 12 km/h, temperature 58, no visible smoke. At 2:17 a.m., I saw movement near the tree line. The moonlight was thin, just enough to paint silver lines over the forest. About 100 yards out, between 2 tall pines, something moved, a shadow against shadows. My first thought was a bear. I'd seen plenty up here, but this thing, it was standing, upright, still. I raised my binoculars, but by the time I focused, it was gone. The next morning, I told myself it had to be my imagination, the light, the fog, maybe fatigue from the climb up. I logged it anyway, under wildlife sightings, unconfirmed. By the third night, the unease had turned into something else. I'd woken up around midnight to the sound of footsteps on the catwalk that wrapped around the tower. Light, careful steps, not the scuff of boots, not the padding of paws, something slower, deliberate. I grabbed my flashlight and my field knife, standard issue, and stepped quietly to the door. The steps stopped. I waited, counting my heartbeat in my throat. 10 seconds, 20, then nothing. When I finally swung the door open, the catwalk was empty. The air outside was so cold it made my breath visible. I shined the flashlight along the railings. No footprints, no animals. Just the wind and the faint sound of branches swaying below. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been right outside that door, watching me through the thin wood and glass. The next morning, Grace radioed me for a check-in. "Summit Ridge, this is base. How's our lookout today?" "All clear," I said automatically. "You sound tired." "Didn't sleep much, might have had a bear snooping around." "Any tracks?" "None that I saw." "Keep your eyes open. There've been weird reports from the northern valleys. Strange noises at night. Probably nothing, but stay alert." She didn't say what kind of reports. That afternoon, while scanning the East Ridge, I found footprints leading up the slope below the tower. Human prints, single file, deep, fresh. I followed them for maybe 30 yards before they stopped, just ended in the middle of nowhere, as if whoever made them had been lifted straight off the ground. By evening, I'd convinced myself to stop thinking about it. People got lost out here sometimes. Hikers wandered off trail. The forest did strange things to sound and shape and distance. I wasn't new to this, but every time I looked at those prints, I felt the same cold weight in my chest. Something about them matched the size of my own boots. I spent that night awake again, reading through my logbooks from the previous seasons. I'd always kept them obsessively detailed. Weather conditions, wildlife patterns, even the names I'd given to the hawks and deer that passed by regularly. But something about that summer felt different. The quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt expectant. By dawn, I'd made myself coffee so strong it could have stripped paint and sat watching the mist rise from the trees. The sky was pink, almost beautiful, and I remember thinking how fragile everything looked from up there, like the world was being held together by the sound of wind alone. I wanted to believe it was all in my head. That the voice on the radio, the footprints, the shadow by the trees, none of it meant anything, but deep down I already knew better, because I'd seen something like this once before, years ago, during a wildfire on the Olympic Peninsula. My crew had been stationed near a canyon where the flames burned so hot they turned the night sky orange. We heard voices that night too, familiar voices calling for help from inside the smoke, but when we followed them we found nothing, just ashes. Some nights I still hear those same voices in my dreams, and when I heard my name over that radio the second night at Summit Ridge, I knew the mountain had found a way to speak back. If you're hearing this, if you've ever wondered what it's like to be alone in the wild, where no one can reach you, remember this: silence has its own kind of language. And once you start listening too closely, you might not like what you hear. Before I tell you what really happened up there, I just want to say this: if you enjoy stories like this one, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and help keep it alive. Every bit of support gives me a reason to keep sharing these stories. True or not, they remind us how thin the line really is between fear and fascination, because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about being alone. I didn't plan on writing about that summer. When you sign up to be a lookout, you expect to come back with stories about sunsets, lightning storms, maybe a close encounter with a curious bear. Not this. But every time I try to leave it behind, I dream of the tower, the sound of its wood shifting in the wind, the thin railing that was the only thing between me and the sky, the empty forest breathing below. The mountain isn't done with me, so I'll keep telling this until it is. The third week of June started clear. No storms, no smoke, no sign of people. Headquarters said tourism was lower than usual that year because of new trail restrictions. I liked it that way. I'd never come up here for company. Still, the feeling of being watched didn't go away. Sometimes I'd be halfway through my evening scan when the back of my neck would prickle. That instinctive tug that says you're not alone. I'd turn, expecting to see a raven on the railing or a strayed deer below. Nothing. Just the forest, endless and still. Then the sounds began. At first it was the usual, branches creaking, wind rolling through the trees. An occasional crack like a pine cone hitting the ground. But around midnight the rhythm would change. The sounds would sync up. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more. Always 3. I logged it the first few nights thinking maybe woodpeckers. Then I noticed it only happened when the wind died completely, when even the forest seemed to be holding its breath. That pattern, 3 knocks, silence, 3 knocks, followed me for days. I started counting without realizing it, tapping my finger on the desk in time. I even dreamt in 3s. On June 18th, the mountain broke its silence in a different way. Grace called in the morning, asking if I'd seen smoke near the southern ridge. I hadn't. I scanned twice and reported clear skies. She thanked me and added, almost as an afterthought, "You're not the only one up there this season. We've got a new post at Cascade Point 22 miles east. Rookie named Cole. Maybe you'll hear him on the radio." It felt good to know someone else was out there, even if I couldn't see him. That night, I did hear a new voice. "Summit Ridge, this is Cascade Point. You copy?" "Copy, Cascade. Go ahead." "Just checking in. Heard we're neighbors this season." "Looks like it," I said, smiling even though no one could see me. His laugh crackled through static. "Nice view up there." "Perfect. You?" "Could use better coffee." We talked for 5 minutes, mostly about weather patterns and bird sightings. It felt normal, human. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel completely alone. But when I mentioned Grace by name, the line went dead. At first, I thought the signal dropped. I tried again. "Cascade, this is Summit Ridge. You still there?" No answer, just faint breathing. Then, very quietly, a whisper. "Grace isn't talking anymore." The radio cut out completely after that. I didn't sleep at all. Every hour I'd click the radio back on, waiting for a signal, but all I got was the same hollow static. When morning came, I called Grace directly. She answered, calm as always. "Morning, Eli. How's our watchman?" "I talked to Cole last night. He said something weird." "Cole?" she interrupted. "Who's Cole?" "The new lookout at Cascade Point. You said I didn't assign anyone to Cascade Point. That tower's been closed since last fall." I remember just staring at the radio, waiting for her to laugh, to tell me she was joking. She didn't. "Eli, you sure you weren't picking up an old frequency?" Sometimes atmospheric pressure bounces transmissions. No, I said slowly. He knew my name. That day, I checked the maintenance records for Cascade Point. The last report was dated August 2021, 2 years earlier. The entry was short. Post abandoned due to structural instability. From that moment on, I kept the radio off at night. Isolation does strange things to a person's head, especially when the only voice you trust starts to sound uncertain. I caught myself rereading old journal entries, making sure they were real, that I hadn't written something that wasn't mine. My handwriting looked shakier than usual. The forest didn't help. By late June, the fog rolled in heavy and thick, swallowing the view. I couldn't see more than 100 feet below the tower. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of movement, shadows drifting between the trees, slow and tall. Then came the footprints again. I found them after a night of restless sleep. I'd gone out to sweep the catwalk when I noticed mud on the boards. Not the usual kind left by my own boots. These were smaller, narrower, like a barefoot human had walked up to the edge, then stopped facing the door. The prints ended there. No smudge from leaving, no heel turning away. I knelt down, measuring with my hand. The mud was cold, sticky, and fresh. It hadn't rained in days. By then, I started to document everything like evidence. Dates, coordinates, sketches. I even photographed the prints with my old Nikon. I don't know why I kept pretending I was in control. Maybe writing it down made it feel manageable. 2 nights later, I woke to static again. Not words this time, just a rhythm, faint but familiar. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks. Only this time it was coming from the radio speaker itself. I turned it off. The sound kept going. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the little black box, waiting for it to stop. My coffee went cold, the candle burned low, and still the knocking went on, steady and patient. It finally ended around dawn, just as the first light hit the trees. That morning I hiked down a few hundred yards, needing air that wasn't recycled through my fear. The fog was thicker than ever, the kind that blurs distance. About halfway down, I found something hanging from a branch, a piece of canvas torn and frayed, printed with faded letters. Cascade Point, property of NPS. It shouldn't have been there. That tower was 20 miles away. If it even still existed. I brought it back to the cabin and set it on the desk. The next time I looked up, the radio light was blinking red. A message waiting. I pressed play. Static first, then a voice. Summit Ridge, this is Cascade Point. I found your tracks. My heart stopped. Nice work up there, the voice continued, light, casual. My own voice. Then silence. I didn't tell Grace about that message. I didn't log it. I didn't even delete it. I just sat there for hours, listening to the mountain breathe through the cracks in the tower walls. That was the night I started locking the door. Sometimes when I look back, I think maybe the mountain was testing me, seeing how far I could bend before breaking. But the truth is simpler. I was already broken before I ever set foot up there. The quiet didn't heal me. It exposed the cracks I'd been hiding. That realization didn't come all at once. It came the next night when I woke to see my reflection in the glass across the room. Only I wasn't the one moving. When I first saw the reflection, I didn't move. The window sat across from my bed. A perfect square of darkness with my own faint outline in it. I'd left the lamp on low so I could just make out my face. Pale, tired, eyes ringed in sleepless shadow. For a moment I thought I was dreaming. Then the reflection blinked. I hadn't. I froze, every nerve in my body screaming not to look away. The reflection tilted its head, just slightly, like it was studying me, then straightened again. My mind scrambled for logic. Maybe it was a trick of the glass, double exposure from the lantern light, or maybe I was so sleep-deprived I was hallucinating. But then I saw its mouth move. It smiled, a slow, deliberate curl of lips that didn't belong to me. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it straight at the window. The reflection vanished. All I could see was my own terrified face staring back. That was the first time I seriously considered leaving. I packed my bag halfway, just enough food, water, and ammunition to make it down the mountain. But something stopped me. It wasn't bravery. It was something closer to stubbornness. A firefighter's pride, maybe. I'd seen worse things in the line of duty. Real things, human things. I wasn't about to let a mountain spook me out of my post. I forced myself to stay another day, then another. The next morning brought a fragile sort of calm. Sunlight filtered through the trees, and for a few hours, I managed to convince myself I'd overreacted. I cleaned the tower, swept the catwalk, and made a full weather report for the first time in days. It almost felt normal, until I found the notebook. It was lying on the desk where I kept my field logs, but it wasn't one of mine. The cover was sun-bleached, edges curled from moisture, with the faint National Park Service logo still visible on the back. Inside were pages of neat handwriting, signed at the bottom of each entry. N. Cole, Cascade Point. My chest tightened as I flipped through the entries. The first few pages looked ordinary. Fire danger ratings, wildlife counts, maintenance notes. But halfway through, the tone shifted. June 12th, heard knocking again tonight. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. Sounded like it came from under the floor this time. Thought it was wind until I heard breathing with it. June 13th, saw my reflection move when I didn't. Not sure if fatigue or something else. Tried not to look too long. Felt like it was studying me. June 15th, something's wrong with the radio. Keeps repeating my own calls back hours later. Same words, same tone. I checked the log. I never said them. The last entry was dated June 17th. The handwriting was shaky, smeared. It's not outside anymore. It's learning. There was no signature. I dropped the notebook and backed away from the desk. My pulse hammered in my ears. Every window felt like an open wound. Every reflection like a trap waiting for me to look too long. I didn't know what to do. The logical part of my mind wanted to treat it as evidence, call it in, report it, have someone come up and take the notebook for analysis. But another part of me, the part that had heard my own voice whispering through static, knew better. The mountain didn't want witnesses. That night, fog wrapped the tower so tightly it looked like the world had been erased beyond the railing. I sat by the window with the rifle across my lap, the notebook open beside me, trying not to imagine Cole's last moments. The radio stayed off, but around midnight I heard it anyway. The faint, rhythmic knock, 3 beats at a time. I walked slowly to the door, listening. The sound wasn't coming from outside this time. It was coming from below. The tower stood on 4 thick wooden supports, each anchored into concrete 20 feet down. Underneath, the space was empty, just cold air and a few storage barrels. I'd never once heard movement from beneath the floor. Until now, I crouched, pressing my ear against the boards. The knocks were softer now, almost polite. Thump, thump, thump. Then a voice, muffled but clear enough to make my skin crawl. "Eli!" I stumbled backward, knocking over the chair. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. I aimed the rifle at the floor, every muscle trembling. The voice came again, quiet, coaxing. "Eli, it's Grace. Are you awake?" My stomach dropped. It sounded exactly like her, calm, warm, professional. But Grace never used that tone when she was working. She was always brisk on the radio, never soft like this. I forced myself to the desk and switched the radio on. The green light blinked to life. "Grace, this is Summit Ridge. You copy?" Static, then the same voice from under the floor this time. "You shouldn't have read the notebook." I yanked the plug out of the wall. The sound stopped instantly. For the rest of the night, I sat by the door with the rifle in hand, staring at the boards. No more knocks came, no more voices, only silence. When the sun rose, I opened the hatch and climbed down the ladder. For the first time in weeks, the ground was cold and damp beneath my boots. I circled the tower, scanning every inch of dirt and foundation. Nothing. No tracks, no tools, no sign of anything human. But in the soft mud beneath the center beam, there was a single handprint, not pressed into the mud, pressed outward from underneath it. I didn't touch it. I just stared until my vision blurred, then went back inside. For the next 2 days, I stopped logging weather reports. I barely ate. The isolation that once felt like a gift now felt like a sentence. Every creak of the wood sounded like footsteps. Every shadow that passed over the windows looked like a person standing just out of view. I couldn't even trust my own reflection. I'd covered the windows with spare blankets, but even then I'd catch glimpses of movement in the glass of the clock, the surface of my coffee, the metal of the rifle barrel. On the 4th night, I found a message carved into the inside of the door. "Stop talking to yourself." The words were cut deep, splintering the wood as if done with a knife. I hadn't written it, but the worst part wasn't the message. It was the signature underneath. My own name, Eli Turner, carved in shaky, uneven letters. That was when I knew the mountain wasn't just watching me. It was learning how to speak back. People ask me sometimes why I didn't leave right then, why I didn't just hike down and call for help. The truth is, I don't know. Maybe I thought I could fix it. Maybe I wanted answers. Maybe deep down, I wanted to see how far the silence could go before it swallowed me completely. Whatever the reason, I stayed, and that decision, to stay one more night, was the last calm choice I ever made. Because the next morning the forest gave me something new, something I could no longer explain away. At exactly 6:43 a.m., while writing a report I'd never send, I heard a soft thud outside the tower, like something heavy landing in the grass. I stepped out onto the catwalk and looked down. There, lying at the base of the stairs, was a photograph. I couldn't see what it was from that height, so I climbed down, heart pounding in my throat. The air was sharp and still. I picked up the photograph, brushing off dirt. It was a picture of me, standing in the tower window, taken from below. And in the picture, someone was standing directly behind me. When I saw that photograph, I didn't move for what felt like minutes. The morning air was thin and bright, the kind of light that should have made everything feel safe. But my hands were shaking so hard, the photo nearly slipped from my fingers. It was me, unmistakably me, standing at the window of Summit Ridge Tower, coffee mug in hand, looking down toward the forest. I recognized the shirt, the posture, even the way my left shoulder tilted slightly from an old injury. But what made my stomach twist was the figure standing just behind me, inside the tower. It wasn't clear, the photo was taken from far away, but the outline was human, taller than me, leaner, and the shape of its head was wrong, too narrow, too still. I turned the photo over. There was writing on the back. Nice view from up here. No signature, no fingerprints. I dropped it and backed away like it was alive. My brain spun through every possible explanation. Maybe Grace or the Rangers sent someone up to check on me. Maybe a lost hiker stumbled across the tower. Maybe, but no. There was no one within 20 miles of Summit Ridge. Grace's daily reports confirmed it. That meant someone, or something, had been close enough to the tower to take that picture, and close enough to stand behind me without me knowing. I went back inside and bolted the door. Every window stayed covered. Every noise made my pulse spike. That evening, I finally broke. I grabbed the radio, turned it on, and called for Grace again. Summit Ridge to base, come in. Grace, it's Eli. We've got a situation up here. Possible trespasser, maybe more than one. Over. Nothing, just static. I tried again, louder. Base, this is Summit Ridge. I repeat, possible intruder. Respond. Static. Then, faintly, her voice. Eli, you're breaking up. Say again. Grace, someone's been near the tower. I found... But before I could finish, the radio crackled violently. Her voice warped mid-sentence, turning sharp and hollow. Eli, it said, my name stretched out until it didn't sound human. Then the same 3 knocks came through the speaker. Thump, thump, thump. The radio shut itself off. That was the first time I truly felt fear. Not panic, not confusion. Fear in its purest form. The kind that makes your body feel foreign, your mind slippery and unreliable. I sat in the corner of the room until the sun dipped below the horizon, too scared to move. I didn't even notice the fire until the smell hit me. It was faint at first. Wood smoke, the kind that clings to your clothes after a campfire. I checked the stove. Cold. Then I looked outside. Down in the valley, maybe 2 miles away, a thin column of smoke curled upward into the darkening sky. For a moment, I forgot my fear. The old instinct took over, the firefighter in me that still lived under all that quiet. I grabbed the binoculars, adjusted focus, and saw what looked like a small blaze near the base of a ridge. Contained. Controlled. But definitely man-made. Someone was down there. I called it in 3 times, but the radio stayed dead. So I made a choice. Against every rule and every shred of reason, I decided to hike down at first light. If someone had built a fire that close to the lookout, I needed to know who and why. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the door with my backpack ready, the rifle leaning against the wall, the photograph lying face down on the desk. The air outside felt thicker than usual, heavy like before a storm. At some point, I must have dozed off, because when I opened my eyes again, it wasn't dawn. It was still dark, and there was light outside. A flicker of orange moved through the trees, weaving between trunks like a lantern. Then another, then another. 3 lights in total, spaced evenly apart, moving slowly toward the tower. I couldn't breathe. I watched through the crack in the curtain as they stopped at the base of the hill, swaying gently like they were floating. For a moment the forest went completely silent. No wind, no insects, no sound at all. Then a voice drifted up from the dark. Eli! It wasn't shouted. It wasn't even loud, just carried perfectly through the still air. Eli, come down! It sounded like Grace, exactly like her. I almost answered, almost, but something in that voice was wrong. Grace's tone had always been crisp, professional. This one had a smile buried inside it, a smile I could hear. I stayed quiet. The lights moved closer together, then stopped again. One of them lifted higher, like someone had raised a hand holding a lantern. But I realized, slowly, horribly, that it wasn't a lantern at all. It was an open mouth, a glowing human-shaped mouth. That's the last thing I remember clearly from that night. I must have blacked out because when I woke up, it was morning. The lights were gone. The forest looked ordinary again, golden and harmless under the sun, except the photograph on my desk had changed. The picture was the same, me at the window, but now there was writing across the glass of the tower in the image. In thick, dark strokes, the words read, "See you soon." I left the tower that morning. I didn't grab my things, didn't log my departure, didn't call it in. I just started down the trail toward the valley, toward the smoke I'd seen the night before. Every step felt wrong, like the forest floor was breathing beneath my boots. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. Not silent, worse, hollow, like the sound had been scooped out of the world and replaced with something pretending to be silence. That's when I saw the clearing. Charred ground, blackened trees. No fire, no camp, just ashes spread in a perfect circle, as if someone had burned the forest clean on purpose. And right in the center, half buried in soot, was a single object, a radio, identical to mine. When I picked it up, the speaker crackled to life. "Summit Ridge," my own voice said through static. "Base here, welcome back." That's where part one ends for me. That was the moment I realized the mountain wasn't just haunted. It was awake, and whatever was out there, it wanted me to talk back. When the mountain finally fell silent again, I stayed standing over that radio for a long time. The ash still clung to my boots. The air smelled faintly metallic, and the device in my hands kept ticking. Some tiny mechanism inside still alive, even though the speaker had gone dead. Every instinct told me to throw it away. Instead, I clipped it to my belt and started documenting. Old habits die hard. A firefighter is trained to report, record, verify. That discipline was the only thing keeping me from unraveling. I took photographs of the burned clearing, measuring the radius with a piece of paracord and the edge of my boot. 23 paces across, perfectly circular, the soil baked into a crust. The center was darker than the rest, like something had radiated heat outward instead of inward. No scorch marks on the nearby trunks. No fallen branches, just a black ring and the radio lying exactly at its center, antenna pointing toward Summit Ridge. It didn't look like a campfire, it looked like a message. The hike back up was slower than I expected. Every few minutes I stopped to write in my field log, anything to prove later that this wasn't a dream. 0607 hours, temperature 52 degrees, visibility moderate, evidence of controlled burn, no smoke, no residual heat. I even photographed my own footprints alongside the pattern in the ash, as if to remind myself what was real and what might not be. Halfway up the slope, I noticed something I hadn't seen on the way down. A metal tag nailed to a cedar trunk. It was tarnished green with age, the numbers almost erased, but I could still read the letters stamped across the top. Cascade PT, B17. I stared at it for a long time. Cascade Point was supposed to be 22 miles east, so what was a marker from that post doing less than a mile from mine? I brushed moss off the tag. Beneath the oxidation, faint tool marks showed where someone had pried at it before. A corner was bent upward as if someone had tried to remove it and given up. That was when I realized I'd been hearing something beneath the breeze, a faint clicking like a camera shutter trying to focus. I turned slowly, scanning the trees. Nothing moved. The sound stopped. I forced myself to breathe evenly, checked the safety on my rifle, and pressed on. By noon, I'd reached a rocky ledge that looked down over the northern valley. From there, the forest opened into a basin choked with deadfall and fog. The GPS marked the coordinates almost directly between Summit Ridge and the officially abandoned Cascade Point. If the tag was any indication, there had been another structure here once, something the Park Service had either forgotten or deliberately erased. I took out my compass and followed the line northeast, stepping over moss-covered beams that looked suspiciously milled. 10 minutes later, I found it, a cluster of weather-gray posts jutting from the earth like ribs, the remains of a tower. It had collapsed long ago. The floor planks lay scattered, the iron bolts rusted to orange powder. A single ladder section leaned drunkenly against a stump. But what caught my eye was the patch of ground beneath it, clean, bare dirt surrounded by thick undergrowth. Someone had been here recently. I knelt, brushing away loose soil. Underneath was a footprint clear as a stamp, boot tread, size close to mine, and beside it, another set, barefoot, narrow, long-toed, pressed deep into the mud. I felt the cold creep back into my chest. Still, I did what training demanded. Photograph, log, analyze. I counted the steps. The boot prints moved toward the ruins. The barefoot ones led away, headed in the direction of my tower. That was when I found the thermos. It sat half buried in pine needles near the base of a fallen beam. When I unscrewed the lid, steam hissed out. The coffee inside was still warm. I don't remember dropping it, but I heard the metallic thud and the splash as liquid soaked into the dirt. Warm coffee meant someone had been there minutes ago. "Hello," I called before I could stop myself. My voice echoed through the basin, bounced off the trees, came back wrong, thinner, delayed, like someone answering from far away. "Hello?" The same word, the same inflection, but a fraction of a second later. I gripped the rifle tighter and took a slow step backward. The echo followed, perfectly matching the scrape of my boot. Step for step. "Who's there?" I tried again. "Who's there?" the forest repeated, not from my left or right, but in front of me, about 20 yards ahead. For a moment I caught movement through the fog, a shape the color of wet bark standing still between two cedars, human-sized, its head tilted the way mine had the night I saw my reflection move. Then it was gone. I stood rooted to the spot, waiting for my pulse to slow. Every instinct screamed to run, but another part of me, stubborn, desperate for evidence, forced me to lift the camera and snap 3 quick shots in the direction of the shape. The shutter echoed, metallic and final. The sound that came back wasn't an echo. It was another shutter click, softer, deeper in the woods, like something taking pictures of me. That's when I left. The climb back to Summit Ridge felt endless. By the time I reached the tower, the sun had dipped low and my legs were shaking. I locked the door behind me, set the rifle on the table, and reviewed the photos on my camera. The first 2 showed only fog and trees. The third, taken just before I ran, showed something else. Between the trunks, faint but visible, was a person's silhouette. Same jacket, same backpack, same stance as mine. I zoomed in until the pixels broke apart. The figure's head was turned slightly to the side. And in the blur where a face should have been, I could make out the faint glint of a lens, like a mirror held up to me. I deleted the photo before I could think too hard about it, then immediately regretted it. Proof was slipping through my fingers like smoke. That night, I filed a single entry in my logbook, unidentified human presence near old Cascade site, possible unauthorized personnel or trespasser, behavior unknown. Will investigate again after daylight. I signed it, time-stamped it, and closed the book. The motion steadied my hands, made me feel almost sane. But outside, the forest had started knocking again. 3 slow beats, a pause, 3 more. The mountain looked harmless in daylight. It always did. Sunlight cut through the mist, turning the fog into thin ribbons that drifted between the trees, like ghosts too tired to scare anyone. From my tower, I could see the basin below, the same place where I'd found the collapsed structure yesterday. In that light, it almost looked peaceful. But peace up here was a trick of distance. The forest only looked calm when you weren't standing inside it. By mid-morning, I'd packed what I needed: my camera, a fresh notebook, 3 flares, a pocket knife, and the rifle slung across my shoulder. I left the radio behind. I didn't want that voice finding a way through again. Before stepping outside, I caught my reflection in the small mirror by the door. I looked wrecked. Bloodshot eyes, unshaven face, skin pale from too many days without real rest. Document and return, I told myself out loud. The way you recite a safety mantra before walking into smoke. Go down, take the evidence, come back. The forest accepted me quietly. No wind, just the soft crunch of pine needles under my boots. I followed the same route as yesterday, marking trees with orange tape every few hundred feet. The rational part of my brain needed to know I could find my way back if something went wrong. When I reached the marker nailed to the cedar, I stopped. The tag I'd brushed clean was gone. Only the rusty nails remained, sticking out like crooked teeth. I took a photo, then kept moving. The air grew cooler as I descended. A low hum carried on the breeze, barely sound, more like vibration. It seemed to come from the ground itself, pulsing in faint waves that made my stomach twist. By the time I reached the ruins again, the hum had stopped. The basin felt hollow, its silence heavier than before. I started with the thermos. It was still lying where I'd dropped it, though the liquid inside had turned cold. I sealed it in a plastic evidence bag. Next, I documented the footprint patterns more carefully. Boot prints to the center, bare footprints leaving east. The soil was firmer today, but I could still trace the direction they led. I followed them slowly, camera ready. They wound through undergrowth toward a narrow ridge where sunlight struggled to reach. There, half buried under moss, lay a collapsed wooden crate. The stenciled letters were barely visible. U.S. Forest Service, Cascade PT Supply. Inside were scattered items: a broken compass, a canteen, a knife dull from rust, and a folded map sealed in wax paper. When I opened it, my pulse jumped. The map wasn't topographic. It was hand-drawn, meticulous, with small notations in blue ink. Each symbol represented a tower site across the Olympic Range, Summit Ridge, Cascade Point, and several others I didn't recognize. But someone had drawn thin red lines connecting them like veins, converging in a perfect circle at the center. And written in the margin, in that same careful handwriting I'd seen in Cole's notebook, were 3 words: "It moves closer." I crouched there, reading the phrase again and again. It moves closer. Was Cole tracking something, or warning the next person who found this place? I almost missed the sound at first, a soft scrape, wood against wood. It came from beneath the wreckage of the old tower. I froze, listening. Another scrape, followed by the quiet tick-tick-tick of metal tapping against stone. Something was under the debris. I stepped closer, gripping the rifle. The smell hit me first. Damp earth mixed with something faintly electrical, like burnt wires. I shifted one of the broken planks with my boot, and a glint of metal flashed in the shadows. It wasn't a tool. It was a camera. An old model, mid-2010s digital, coated in grime. I brushed it off and pressed the power button. To my surprise, it clicked on, battery half charged. The screen lit up with a thumbnail grid of photographs, dozens of them. Every single image showed the same thing: the forest from this exact angle, looking up towards Summit Ridge Tower. The timestamps covered nearly 3 weeks. Someone had been watching my post long before I ever saw the first footprints. The final photo stopped my breath. Taken at 3:42 a.m. 2 nights ago. The camera pointed upward through fog, catching a faint outline of the tower against the night sky. In the center window, my window, a figure stood looking out, and behind that figure another one leaned close, its head nearly touching the glass. My thumb hovered over the delete button. Instead, I powered the camera off and slid it into my pack. By the time I looked up, the forest had gone darker. Clouds rolled in fast, muting the sunlight to a dull gray. I checked my watch, 12:15 p.m., but the light looked more like dusk. That's when I heard the second hum, louder, closer. It rose through the soil in waves, making the metal buttons on my jacket vibrate. I crouched and placed a hand on the ground. The vibration pulsed in rhythm. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats. The sound seemed to move beneath me, traveling east toward the valley. I followed, careful not to lose the trail. After a few hundred yards, the path opened into another clearing. Here, the trees had been stripped bare on one side, bark peeled away in vertical streaks. Each scar was about 6 feet long, carved deep, forming lines that curved inward toward the center of the clearing. Standing there felt like being inside a giant fingerprint. I circled the perimeter, taking photos, when I noticed something new embedded into one of the carved trunks. A metal nameplate, cleaner than the others. It read, Cole Nathan Fire Lookout Cascade PT 2021. Below the name, etched by hand into the wood itself, were 2 words, still here. I took a step back, heart pounding. The letters were fresh. The cuts hadn't even darkened yet. Whoever carved them did it within the last day. A branch cracked behind me. I turned fast, rifle up. Nothing but trees and fog. My breath came out sharp in the cold. Another branch snapped to my right, closer this time, followed by the faint crunch of leaves underfoot. I aimed in that direction, finger trembling near the trigger. The movement stopped. The forest held its breath. Then something mirrored my stance exactly, 20 feet away, behind the thin veil of mist. I couldn't see its face, but its outline matched mine perfectly. When I shifted the rifle slightly left, it did the same. When I exhaled, I saw a puff of vapor where its mouth would be. I froze, staring at my own silhouette, standing out there in the fog. For a full minute, neither of us moved. Then it lifted its hand, slowly, deliberately, and pointed straight at me. That tiny motion broke whatever composure I had left. I fired once into the mist. The gunshot thundered through the valley, echoing off the ridge. Birds exploded from the trees. When the smoke cleared, the figure was gone. I stood shaking, the rifle heavy in my hands. On the ground where the bullet had struck, I found a fragment of glass, small, curved, like part of a camera lens. I left it there. The hike back to the tower was a blur of adrenaline and doubt. The closer I got, the more wrong the landscape looked. My trail markers, those bright orange strips I'd tied only hours earlier, were gone. In their place, I found others, identical but tied in different knots. Someone was copying my path. When Summit Ridge finally came into view, the sun was dipping low again, red light slicing through the fog. From that distance, the tower looked unchanged, but as I got closer, I saw movement through the windows. Someone was inside. I stopped 50 yards away, hidden behind a fallen log, watching my own cabin against the dying light. The silhouette inside moved slowly, pacing from one window to another, exactly the way I did during my hourly scans. It paused, turned toward the forest, and for a second I swore it was looking straight at me. Then it raised a hand. My hand. I dropped behind the log, heart slamming in my chest. When I dared to look again, the figure had vanished. The tower was empty. I didn't go inside right away. I sat in the dirt until the stars came out, the wind rattling the trees like warning bells. When I finally climbed the stairs, the door was unlocked. On the desk lay the same camera I'd taken from the ruins, cleaned, lens unbroken, power light blinking softly, and next to it a note written in my handwriting, "Nice view from up here." I didn't sleep that night. The tower felt smaller than ever, as if the walls had crept closer while I was gone. Every creak sounded like a footstep. Every shift of wind through the rafters felt like breath on the back of my neck. At 2 a.m., I gave up on pretending to rest and started an experiment. If something out there was copying me, I needed proof. Proof I could hold, measure, show to someone else before I ended up in the same report as Cole. Psychological fatigue, isolation-induced delusion. First, the footprints. I scattered a light layer of flour across the floorboards by the door and the window where I'd last seen movement. If anything entered while I slept, I'd know. Then I set up my old trail camera on the catwalk, pointed toward the stairs. It was motion-activated, powered by fresh batteries. Next, I marked the time on my watch, 02:47, and spoke into the recorder app on my phone. Test 1, recording ambient sound for 20 minutes. My voice sounded flat, uncertain even to me. I sat in the dark, listening. The forest outside whispered with its usual rhythm. For the first 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then faintly, I heard it. Another voice, lower, farther away, repeating my words in perfect sync but delayed by 2 seconds. Test 1, it echoed, the tone identical, down to the nervous quiver. I froze, eyes locked on the door. My phone kept recording. "If you can hear me," I said carefully, "say something new." 2 seconds of silence, then softly, "Say something new." My stomach turned cold. I ended the recording, locked the phone, and placed it face down on the table. The repetition stopped immediately. By morning, the flower near the door was undisturbed, but at the window there was a single print. Barefoot, long, thin toes pressed neatly into the powder from the outside in. I photographed it, measured it, 12 inches exactly, and covered it with a glass bowl so I wouldn't start doubting what I'd seen later. That was the point I realized I wasn't just documenting anymore. I was gathering evidence for whoever came after me. Cole had done the same, leaving notes and photos for a stranger he'd never meet. Maybe he'd known someone else would need them. Maybe this was the cycle. Around noon, I forced myself to contact base again. Grace's voice came through after several tries, faint and patchy. "Summit Ridge, you're overdue for weather. Everything all right up there?" I almost told her everything, the footprints, the mimic, the camera on my desk, but stopped. If I sounded unstable, they'd pull me out, write it off as stress, and close the file. Then nobody would ever know. "Routine day," I said instead. "Visibility moderate, no smoke." A long pause crackled over the line. "All right, keep your logs clean, Eli, and get some rest." When the radio clicked off, I felt something close to guilt. I'd lied to her, and worse, I'd started to understand why Cole might have done the same. The rest of the afternoon I spent cataloging. The old camera from the ruins sat on the desk beside mine, the blinking light steady. I hadn't turned it on since finding the note, but now I needed to know what it had captured overnight. I pressed play. The screen showed the tower interior, dimly lit by starlight filtering through the window. At 3:03 a.m., the motion sensor triggered. A shape entered the frame. It was me. Same clothes, same posture, walking in from the door. But I'd been inside already. I remembered locking it. The second me crossed the room, leaned over the table, and looked directly into the lens. The face that stared back was expressionless, skin slightly too smooth, eyes open but unfocused. Then, without blinking, it raised its hand and pointed to the window, the exact gesture I'd seen in the forest. The footage ended. I rewound it 3 times, searching for a glitch, a cut, any hint of editing. None. The timestamp matched the moment I'd heard the echoing voice outside. I should have been terrified, but instead a strange calm settled over me. Fear had limits, curiosity didn't. Whatever this was, it followed patterns. Patterns could be mapped, studied, understood. I drew a quick chart in my notebook. Radio interference, 3-knock rhythm. Voice mimicry, 2-second delay. Visual duplication, observed 3:03 a.m. Each event occurred roughly 48 hours apart. The next should come tomorrow night. That gave me time. I spent the day reinforcing the tower like a man preparing for a storm. Barricaded the door with a steel rod, nailed boards across the weaker window frames, rigged a line of empty cans on twine as a noise trap around the catwalk. It looked absurd, but it made me feel in control again. As evening fell, the forest returned to its golden calm. For a while, I could almost pretend things were normal. I made coffee, wrote my log, watched the sun slip behind the ridge. Then, right before dusk, I noticed movement at the base of the hill. Through the binoculars, I saw a person walking slowly up the path. Male, average build, wearing a ranger's uniform. Relief flooded me so fast I nearly dropped the lens. Help! Finally, I grabbed the radio. Summit Ridge to base, I've got visual on personnel approaching from the South Trail. Please confirm. Static, then Grace's voice. Negative, Eli. No one scheduled in your sector today. I looked again. The man was still coming, unhurried, boots crunching in rhythm with mine as I stepped back. The binoculars caught his face as he tilted it toward the light. It was mine. He raised a hand in greeting, palm open, the same way I had when signaling rangers before. For a second, I almost returned it. Then I saw his smile. Too wide, too patient. I dropped the binoculars, heart hammering. When I looked again, the path was empty. The wind picked up suddenly, rattling the cans on the catwalk like a chorus of alarms. I shut the radio off and backed away from the window, every instinct screaming to stay quiet. For a long minute, nothing happened. Then, faintly, from the direction of the forest, 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. I gripped the rifle, counting the rhythm until it stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. That's when I realized the camera on the desk was recording again. Red light blinking steadily. On its small screen, I could see myself standing there, rifle raised. The live feed showed my back, my posture, my shaking hands. But in the reflection on the window behind me, there was another figure. It wasn't moving. It didn't need to. It was waiting for me to turn around. I should have turned off the camera. But curiosity is louder than fear. The red light blinked steadily, reflecting off the glass of the window where the other figure waited. I forced myself to walk toward it, each step echoing twice. Once from my boots, and again half a second later, as though the tower itself were mimicking my pace. The closer I got, the heavier the air felt. Sound warped, slowed. My own breathing seemed to arrive in pieces lagging behind the movement of my chest. When I finally reached the camera, the delay was clear. What the screen showed wasn't happening in real time. My reflection turned its head a moment after I did. It was me, but out of sync, like a recording that couldn't keep up. I leaned closer. "What are you?" I whispered. The screen flickered. For a single frame, my reflection smiled. I didn't. The temperature dropped so fast my breath turned white. Somewhere inside the walls, something began to knock again. Not the steady 3-beat rhythm this time, but a slow, dragging pulse that seemed to follow my heartbeat. Then the lights went out. The sudden dark swallowed everything. Tower, forest, horizon. Only the tiny camera screen glowed, painting the room in pale blue. On it, my reflection still moved, even though I stood completely still. It raised its hand and touched the inside of the glass. The same motion rippled through the actual window a second later. Faint indentations appeared on the dust, as if invisible fingers were pressing from the other side. I stumbled backward, hitting the desk. Papers scattered across the floor, fluttering like trapped birds. The reflection tilted its head, eyes wide now, mouth open as though speaking. But there was no sound. Only the clicking hum of the dead radio coming back to life. Static filled the room, dense and wet, the kind of sound that makes your teeth ache. Beneath it, voices began to surface. My voice, Cole's, Grace's, all layered together. "Stay awake, Eli. Stop talking to yourself. It moves closer." I clapped my hands over my ears. The noise didn't stop. It grew inside my skull, echoing off bone. And then, silence. Total, absolute silence. The kind that makes you doubt you still exist. I opened my eyes. The window was empty. The reflection was gone. But something had changed. My watch read 3:18 a.m. The recording on the camera stopped at 3:18 a.m. too. Yet outside, the sky was already turning gray. Dawn light spilling across the ridges. Hours had vanished. I checked the clock on the wall. 6:42 a.m., 3 hours missing. I didn't remember falling asleep. I didn't remember anything, just the cold, the voices, and the reflection smiling. When I turned back to the desk, I saw a new page lying open in my field log. The handwriting was mine. The same looping slant, the same uneven pressure. But I hadn't written those words. "You left the door open. Don't do it again." My gaze snapped to the entryway. The deadbolt was still locked, the chain still hooked, but the air around the frame was colder, as if it had been open recently. I reached for the handle. It was warm to the touch. That was the brief moment when reason broke. Every trained instinct, every logical thought burned away in pure panic. I backed into the corner, rifle raised, waiting for the inevitable knock. It never came. Instead, I heard a voice whisper from the far side of the room, soft, almost conversational. "Eli, you should see what's underneath." The sound came from the floorboards near the bed. I forced myself forward, knees shaking, and crouched. The voice repeated the line, clearer now, like someone speaking through wood. "Underneath, Eli. You left something there." I pulled the bed aside. Beneath it was a hatch I'd never noticed. Small, square, the kind used for maintenance access to wiring. The screws were loose, as if someone had already opened it. For a long time, I just stared at it, pulse hammering. Then I unscrewed the panel and lifted it free. A rush of cold air hit my face. Below was darkness. Not the shallow crawl space I expected, but a narrow tunnel descending straight down into the mountain. The smell was faintly metallic, the same scent I'd noticed near the ruined tower. Something glittered a few feet inside. I leaned down with my flashlight. It was another camera, identical to mine. Same make, same model, even the same scratch on the casing near the lens. When I touched it, the power light blinked on by itself. The screen displayed a live feed, my face staring into it. But behind me in the shot, the reflection was back, standing over my shoulder, its lips moving silently. I dropped the flashlight. It hit the floor and rolled, casting wild circles of light around the room. By the time I picked it up, the reflection was gone again and the tunnel below was empty. I closed the hatch, pushed the bed back over it, and sat on the floor shaking until the sun was fully up. When I finally dared to check the camera again, it was blank. The feed erased, memory wiped clean. Only one new file remained, a short audio clip. I pressed play. The voice that came through was quiet, close. "Test 2, it said, recording ambient sound for 20 minutes. My own words, the same sentence I'd recorded hours before, except this version ended differently. After a pause, the voice whispered, "He's learning." That's when I knew the thing wasn't outside anymore. It was in the tower, maybe in the circuits, maybe in the reflection, maybe somewhere deeper I couldn't reach. But it was here. I opened the window to let the morning light in. The air smelled clean, normal, like pine and dew. For a few minutes I could almost believe I'd imagined it all. Then I noticed the glass. There were fingerprints on the inside, long, thin, perfect, pressed from within, not from where I stood. I didn't sleep after I found the fingerprints. Morning light poured through the windows like nothing had happened. Yet every corner of the tower hummed with quiet electricity, that prickling static you feel before lightning strikes. Even the air tasted metallic like the charge before a storm. The radio clicked on by itself at 7:12 a.m., static only, no voices, but the light on the transmitter blinked in the same rhythm as the 3 knocks from the night before. 3 short flashes, pause, 3 short flashes. It wasn't random. I wrote it down. Joe 7:12 a.m. Triple flash pattern begins. Possible code. The clock's second hand trembled, refusing to tick smoothly. It stuttered in tiny hesitations, like time itself was glitching. My reflection in the glass followed those stutters a split second late, as though the delay had returned with the sunrise. I kept my voice steady for the recorder. Day 29. External phenomenon continues. Possible electrical anomaly, possibly related to last night's event. Even saying the words external phenomenon made me feel less crazy, like I was still a ranger cataloging fire weather instead of a man losing his grip on reality. At 7:34, the static changed. I didn't notice at first. It just sounded denser, as if something had slipped beneath the noise. I turned up the volume. Hidden under the hiss, a voice whispered a single word. "Repeat." I froze. The voice was mine. Not recorded, not distorted. My exact tone speaking in real time, but I hadn't said a thing. I looked at the mic on my table. Its indicator light was on, transmitting. I reached to switch it off, and the voice said again, "Repeat." The sound wasn't coming from the speaker. It was vibrating inside the tower walls. That's when I realized the entity had learned to use the circuits, like it was routing itself through every wire, every grounded surface. For a minute, I just listened. Pulse hammering, the static rose and fell like breathing. Then, as if following my thoughts, the radio clicked again and the signal stabilized into something new, a faint, rhythmic clicking. I recognized it instantly. Morse code. I grabbed my notebook and started translating. The universal distress signal, SOS. The clicks repeated 3 times before cutting out. It was almost funny, a haunting creature asking for help, or maybe mocking me for needing it. I ran through possibilities. Could this be cross-channel interference? Some ham operator out there catching our frequency? But the transmission strength was too weak to be external. The origin was here, inside the tower. I set the camera to record the equipment panel and stepped back. My training told me to gather evidence. My gut told me to burn the whole tower down. Instead, I took inventory of the pattern. Every time the static peaked, the temperature in the room dropped exactly 4 degrees. Every time the signal died, it jumped back up. I began logging the fluctuations. 0810, 67 08 12, 63 08 14, 59. When it hit 55, the radio spoke again. Eli, not my voice this time, a woman's, Grace. The tone was perfect, the warmth, the rhythm. Eli, we're picking up strange telemetry from your post. Please confirm you're receiving this. I snatched the mic. Grace, I hear you. The interference is strong, but I can... She interrupted softly. Stop talking. You'll let it in again. My words died. Static swallowed her voice. Then the channel went dead. I stared at the radio for a full minute before realizing my hand was still pressed to the transmit button. I hadn't let go since I'd answered. My finger was white from the pressure. When I finally released it, the radio crackled once more, and my own reply played back perfectly, word for word, down to the sound of me breathing, except when it reached the line, I can... The voice finished the sentence differently. I can't stop it. The transmission ended. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Fear turned to calculation. If the phenomenon could replay and alter my speech, it meant it was storing sound somewhere, maybe inside the wiring, maybe in ambient frequencies. If so, there would be a pattern. I needed data. I disconnected the radio from the tower's main power line and ran it through my portable battery pack instead. Then I connected my laptop and opened the audio analyzer I'd used years ago to study storm lightning patterns. I recorded 10 minutes of the static feed and ran the spectrum through visualization. What came up wasn't random noise. Beneath the hissing band of white, there was a low-frequency pulse repeating every 61.3 seconds. When I zoomed in, the waveform formed peaks, 5 distinct points, evenly spaced. I overlaid the pattern on my weather logs from the last month. The peaks matched every night of activity, June 7th, 9th, 11th, 13th, and 15th, every 48 hours, precisely at 3:03 a.m., the same moment the reflection moved. I cross-checked the pattern against historical incident reports in the tower database. Fire lookouts who'd gone missing or been reassigned under mental instability. Every disappearance matched those same intervals. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. The thing wasn't haunting me, it was following a schedule. And if the cycle held, the next peak would be tomorrow at 3:03 a.m. That gave me 21 hours. By late afternoon, I'd set up every piece of recording equipment I owned. The tower looked like a lab now, laptops, cables, cameras, and thermometers all humming softly. It made me feel sane again, focused. The readings stayed calm until sunset. Then one by one, the sensors began flickering. The temperature dropped 2 degrees, then 3. A faint hum rolled through the air like the sound of electricity crawling through metal. I spoke into the recorder again, forcing my voice steady. Beginning observation window, 1750 hours, no visual anomalies. A pause. Then, faint but clear, the same words echoed from the other side of the room. 2 seconds late. My reflection whispered them too. I replayed the last recording over and over. My own voice echoed through the small cabin in a perfect loop. Beginning observation window, 1750 hours, no visual anomalies. Then, 2 seconds later, the reflections version followed, soft but steady. Beginning observation window, 1750 hours, no visual anomalies. On the 5th loop, something new appeared in the echo. Faint beeps, tucked beneath the words like Morse code hiding under breath. I isolated the layer and slowed it down. The pattern repeated in clusters of 3. When I translated the first sequence, my blood went cold. It spelled C-A-S-C-A-D-E. The word repeated over and over, fading in and out of the static. Cascade Point, Cole's last post. It couldn't be coincidence. The recordings were trying to show me something, not haunt me, not mimic, but communicate. I wrote everything down, observed Morse fragments, cascade, possibly referencing prior incident site. Entity appears to relay geographical markers. The next step was obvious. Check the rest of the data for coordinates. For 2 hours, I mapped every pulse frequency, every modulation dip. My tower logs became a web of numbers. At first, the coordinates didn't make sense. Random digits scattered across the state. But when I overlaid them on the topographic map pinned to the wall, I saw it. Each set of coordinates aligned perfectly with decommissioned fire lookout sites. Across Washington, Glacier Peak, Cougar Rock, Tolmie Ridge, Goat Mountain, all gone, all erased from official records except for short notes, dismantled after structural damage. Personnel reassigned, records incomplete. I counted 15 locations. Then I counted the pulses. 15 peaks in the waveform, each one a name, each one a tower, each one a person who'd once watched the forest for signs of fire until the signal found them. That realization hit me like a landslide. This wasn't an isolated haunting. It was a network. A system replicating itself through those who listened long enough to hear it. The thought made my stomach twist. I stepped outside onto the catwalk for air, staring out at the endless green below. The forest looked the same as always, calm, ancient, indifferent. I tried to imagine 15 towers scattered across that landscape, each with someone like me inside. Hearing the same static, seeing the same reflections. Were they still out there, or had the signal consumed them, absorbed their voices like it was doing with mine? The radio inside popped. I froze. A faint transmission came through, repeating in broken fragments. Summit Ridge, this is Tolmie Ridge Station. Report, copy. The voice was male, strained. I ran back inside, grabbed the mic. Tolmie Ridge, this is Summit Ridge. I copy. Who is this? Static. Then the reply. He's learning. The voice was mine. Every hair on my body lifted. I slammed the radio off and backed away. For a long moment I stood completely still, listening to my pulse in my ears. The wind outside rose, pushing against the tower walls. I told myself I'd imagined it. Sleep deprivation, pattern fixation, pareidolia. I'd studied psych cases about sensory feedback loops, the brain filling in familiar voices when overloaded with noise. That had to be it. But then the lights flickered again, not randomly, in patterns. Long, short, short, pause, long, short, short. The exact rhythm of the first Morse sequence. I whispered, cascade. The lights dimmed completely, leaving the tower in shadow. That's when the radio clicked back on. A low hum filled the air, steady and deep. It didn't sound like electricity. It sounded like breathing, slow and synchronized with mine. I checked the clock. 10:42 p.m. The next peak wasn't supposed to happen for 4 more hours. I pulled out my notes, flipping through pages. My handwriting began to shift halfway down one page, sharper, faster, as if someone else had finished the sentence for me. The last line read, "Schedule revised. Observation advancing." Advancing, the cycle was accelerating. I switched my laptop display to live feed mode, showing all camera angles. Every lens faced a window or entry point. For 20 minutes, nothing happened. The forest stayed still. Then, one by one, the feeds began to blur. Not glitches, duplications. The images repeated themselves with a delay, like echoes of the same frame. My body appeared twice in each camera, one version moving slightly later than the other. I blinked. Both versions blinked, but out of sync. I reached toward the laptop screen, and the second version's hand reached a moment too soon. "Stop," I whispered. Both mouths whispered back. I unplugged the system in a panic. The screens went black. The silence after that felt alive, pulsing. The hum in the walls grew louder, vibrating through the floorboards. The metal bolts in the tower joints began to ring like tuning forks. Somewhere deep inside the static, a sequence of tones emerged. Low, rising notes like sonar pings. I recorded them automatically, desperate to translate, to understand. They repeated every 6 seconds. When I converted the frequency intervals into numbers and cross-checked them against my map grid, a new set of coordinates appeared. They led 30 miles north, straight to Mount Rainier National Park, the same coordinates listed in Cole's final transmission before he vanished. That's when I stopped pretending this was random. Whatever had infected those towers wasn't haunting them. It was transmitting between them, hopping through frequencies, through reflections, through us. We were the circuit. I looked around the tower, at the cameras, the recorders, the radio, the reflective glass of every window, and realized I'd built the perfect receiver. It had been teaching me how to listen so it could learn how to speak. The hum peaked. My ears rang. The air shimmered faintly like heat distortion, though the temperature had dropped to 50. Through that distortion, shapes flickered, outlines forming near the walls, each one a shadow version of myself in a different pose, writing, watching, speaking, dozens of me. Their mouths moved in unison, whispering fragments of my notes. Humidity 58%, visibility moderate, no smoke visible. It was reading from my journal. I shouted, "Stop!" and every echo of me shouted the same thing a second later. The sound crashed into itself, doubling until it became one voice, one impossible layered voice repeating a single phrase. "We see what you see." Then silence again. The hum died. The reflections vanished. The temperature normalized. I looked at the clock. 3:03 a.m. exactly. When the clock hit 3:04 a.m., everything in the tower went still again. No hum, no interference, just that faint pine and rain smell drifting through the cracked window. I sat there with my notebook open, staring at the coordinates. 4685N, 121.76 W, Mount Rainier National Park. If this was another coincidence, it was a cruel one. Rainier had been my first post before the transfer to Summit Ridge. I still knew the ridgelines by memory, where the valleys ran, where the old service roads crossed the tree line. The coordinates pointed to a specific outcrop above Ipsut Creek, a place rangers used to call the Spine. The tower there had been removed in the 80s after lightning destroyed most of its foundation. No one had lived there for decades. I unfolded the district map, spreading it across the desk. Each pulse I'd recorded, the 15 missing towers, fell neatly into a curve that arced toward Rainier. The pattern wasn't random. It looked like a relay, each location spaced by roughly 40 miles. If this was a transmission network, Rainier was the endpoint. I whispered the words before writing them. All signals converge on Rainier. My voice shook when I said it. For the first time in weeks, fear felt mathematical, clean, organized, undeniable. At sunrise, I started cross-checking official logs. The Forest Service kept digital archives of all fire watch rotations. Using the laptop's weak connection, I pulled up names and dates for every decommissioned site on my list. It took nearly an hour for the files to load, but when they did, I stopped breathing. Each tower's final report ended the same way. Final entry logged at 03:03 a.m. Status, reassignment, medical leave. No follow-up, no clearance form, just silence. Whoever had written those notes, whatever system had processed them, was copying the same closure phrase over and over, like a template. I checked Cole's last report from Cascade Point. Same timestamp, same phrasing. The data wasn't just documenting the disappearances, it was recreating them. By mid-morning, the wind picked up and clouds gathered along the ridges. A storm coming in off the Pacific, humid air rising static levels. The radio hissed with low bursts every few minutes, each one shaped like a breath. I took readings with the handheld barometer, pressure dropping fast, humidity climbing past 80%. Perfect conditions for interference. I couldn't stop myself from thinking it. Maybe the storms weren't coincidences either. Maybe the thing needed the air charged, needed thunderclouds to carry it. I opened the previous night's recordings and isolated the deepest frequencies, the ones below audible range. When I slowed them down 200%, the wave peaks aligned into patterns again, too structured to be noise. Converting them to spectrogram view, I saw faint ridges that spelled out letters. E-L-I. My own name embedded in the static. I felt the floor tilt just a fraction, as though the tower had sighed. Not possible, I whispered. The laptop fan whirred harder, the screen flickered once, and the file changed on its own. New text scrolling across the spectrogram like handwriting. We know your storms. The letters dissolved back into gray noise. I slammed the laptop shut. The sound echoed through the small room and came back half a beat late, as if someone else had slammed theirs too. I needed fresh air. Outside, the clouds had swallowed the sky. The horizon glowed dim white, the kind of light that flattens everything. Down below, the forest moved like an ocean, treetops bending in waves. I used my binoculars to scan the valley. Through the shifting light, I saw glints, reflections, scattered far below, like bits of glass catching sunlight. There were too many to count, all aligned in a line that curved north. For a second, I thought they were puddles, but the light angle was wrong. These things were moving, blinking in rhythm. When the wind dropped, I realized what they were. The old tower mirrors. Each dismantled post had used metal panels polished bright as signal mirrors to flash coordinates during emergencies. They were catching light again now, 15 of them, reflecting in sequence like an enormous pulse climbing toward Rainier. It wasn't random sunlight, it was a chain reaction. I stumbled back inside and scribbled another note. Mirrors active, possibly reflecting signal physically. The network is optical and electromagnetic. Even writing that down felt insane, but the numbers agreed. Every 93 seconds. Another reflection flared. When I timed the interval and converted it to frequency, 0.0078, it matched the sub-audio pulse from my recordings. I was watching the signal travel. Around noon, I brewed coffee so strong it hurt. My hand shook as I poured. I hadn't eaten in almost 2 days, but caffeine felt like survival. The hum in the walls had gone quiet again, yet the tower didn't feel empty. It felt attentive, like the pause between two questions. I needed to prove what was happening, so I decided to send a test. If the phenomenon was two-way, it might answer. I turned on the transmitter, tuned it to the lowest band, still clear, and tapped out a simple message in Morse. QSL, radio slang for "Do you receive me?" Static swallowed the signal, then fell dead. I waited 30 seconds. Nothing. I exhaled, half relieved. Then the answer came, not in sound, but on the barometer screen. The digital numbers blinked once, then shifted to letters. Yes. For a heartbeat, I thought it was an electrical glitch. Then the display changed again. Where are we? The question froze me. The entity wasn't asking, where am I? It asked, where are we? Plural, inclusive. I typed back, using the transmitter keypad this time. Summit Ridge Tower, 4737N121-2W. Who is this? The barometer blinked. ELI, then not you yet. I ripped the batteries out. The screen died instantly, but the last word burned behind my eyes. Yet. The rest of the afternoon disappeared into frantic note-taking. I charted every anomaly, convinced that if I could define the pattern, I could stop it. When dusk came, the readings spiked again. Static built until the air vibrated against my teeth. I recorded everything. Voice, temperature, barometric pressure, radio strength. Somewhere between entries, I noticed I was writing faster, the handwriting tighter. When I blinked, a line appeared that I didn't remember, adding, "Rainier repeats us." The phrase looked like mine, but the spacing was off. Too even, too deliberate. I set the pen down, afraid to touch the paper again. That's when the tower's clock chimed once. Mechanical, metallic. It didn't have a chime. I looked up. The second hand had stopped moving at 2:59 a.m., even though outside the sun had only just set. Time was folding again, compressing toward that single minute, and in that silence between ticks, I heard the faintest whisper in the static, "Memory is a relay." The sound wasn't frightening, it was calm, almost kind. I repeated the words aloud without thinking, and a whisper answered from behind the wall, perfectly synchronized. Relay complete. An hour later, the tower felt almost ordinary again. Wind through the cables, the smell of damp wood after night rain. For a while, I convinced myself the whisper, "Relay complete," had just been a hypnagogic trick, the kind that comes when your brain is 2 days short on sleep. At 5:17 a.m., I decided to check the ridge sensors. If the readings had spiked again, that would at least give me something measurable, something not alive. I clipped the radio to my belt, grabbed the handheld barometer, and stepped outside. The air was sharp and wet. Fog had pooled in the valley, softening the edges of everything. Each breath felt colder than the last. I moved along the catwalk, descended the metal stairs, and followed the short path that wound around to the north face of the ridge. My boots left dark prints in the dew. Halfway down, I stopped to listen. The forest was silent in that particular way it gets before sunrise. No birds yet, no insects, just the low electrical hum of wind through pine needles. When I switched on the portable receiver, the static came alive instantly. It wasn't random hiss. It pulsed in steady beats. 3 seconds on, 3 seconds off. I noted the pattern and continued to the first sensor station, a waist-high aluminum pole with a humidity probe and small transmitter. The display blinked erratically between digits. I crouched to reset it. But before my finger reached the button, the numbers stabilized on their own. 517, the time. Then the digits rolled into letters, something the device shouldn't be able to display. OUTSIDEI stumbled backwards so fast I nearly slipped on the wet rock. My breath clouded white. The word vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving the normal humidity reading behind, 84%. For a long minute, I just stared at the probe. Then I turned off the receiver and started back toward the tower. The air seemed thicker now, sound slower. Each step felt delayed, as though the mountain itself lagged half a second behind me. At the stairwell, I paused again. From up here, Summit Ridge looked small against the ocean of trees. A narrow thread of sunlight cut through the fog and landed directly on the windows of my cabin. For a brief moment, the glass flashed bright, too bright, and I realized I was seeing my own reflection from hundreds of feet away. Except it wasn't quite my reflection. The figure in the window was turned slightly, watching the forest, not me. I took the steps 2 at a time. Inside, the tower was humming. The radio I'd left off was now on, the dial moving by itself in tiny clicks. The voice that came through wasn't speech. It was breath followed by fragments of thought, half-formed sentences that sounded like what happens just before words. He'll check the sensor. Return in 33 seconds. Watch the reflection. My own thoughts, seconds before I'd acted on them. I yanked the plug, but the sound didn't stop. The speaker wasn't broadcasting. The walls were. The tower had become an amplifier for whatever was mapping me. I forced myself to breathe evenly. Data first. Panic later. I opened the notebook to a fresh page and began a log entry. 06:04 a.m. Signal predictive, anticipatory in nature. Appears to mirror internal cognition at intervals of 3 to 5 days. Hypothesis. Entity harvesting neural data via electromagnetic resonance. Speculative. As I wrote the last word, the pencil moved half a heartbeat faster than my hand, finishing the sentence before I did. I dropped it. "Stop it," I said aloud. "Stop it," said the echo, perfectly synchronized this time. The laptop booted itself. One by one, files opened. Audio logs, camera footage, text entries. On the screen, a folder I hadn't created appeared. Echo Forecast. Inside were dozens of short clips named by timestamps that hadn't happened yet. The first read, 06088 wave. Without thinking, I played it. My own voice filled the room. "I'm sitting at the desk. I can hear the rain starting again. The next word I write will be..." I closed the file before it could finish. A second later, rain hit the roof. I flipped to the next clip, a 615 dot or wave. Outside, a figure is standing by the sensor pole. He thinks it's me. The hair on my arms rose. I turned to the window. Through the light drizzle down by the ridge, a silhouette stood exactly where I'd been 10 minutes earlier, facing the tower. The fog folded around it like smoke. I raised the binoculars. The figure lifted its hand at the same moment I did, matching the motion perfectly. Not delayed this time, synchronized. I lowered the binoculars and the figure lowered its hand. Something inside me cracked, not from fear, but from understanding. The signal wasn't imitating me anymore. It was running alongside, like a mirror that had learned how to predict the next frame of film before it developed. When I returned to the desk, the final file in the folder was already highlighted. 0627 Wev. That was 2 minutes from now. I told myself not to open it. I'd seen enough. But curiosity is gravity. You only resist it for so long. The timer on the system clock ticked to 0627. The file played automatically. He's listening. He thinks this is a recording. Tell him we're almost done copying. Then silence. Every device in the tower clicked off at once, radio, laptop, lights, leaving only the faint wind outside and the ticking of the analog clock. Except the clock hands weren't ticking forward anymore. They were ticking backward. Each second that passed erased part of the last minute. My coffee refilled. The notebook's last page smoothed itself clean. I could feel time reversing around the edges of my perception, like film being rewound too fast. And under that movement came the voice, not from speakers now, but from inside my skull. Memory is data. We read you in both directions. I pressed my palms to my ears. The whisper grew louder. Step outside again, Eli. My legs moved before I decided to. I stopped at the threshold, hand on the doorframe, rain misting my face. Down the ridge, the figure still waited, perfectly still. Lightning flickered once far away, illuminating two identical silhouettes, mine and its, each watching the other. I knew then that the next sound, the next word, the next thought might not belong solely to me anymore. Audio log fragment 07:02 a.m. Wind direction northeast. Humidity 84%. Subject reports. Static floods the line for 3 seconds. Then my own breath comes back through the speaker, slower, deeper. I stayed in the doorway longer than I meant to. The rain had almost stopped, leaving a faint ringing in the trees, like metal cooling after heat. Every drop that fell from the roof seemed to echo twice, once on the ground, once somewhere just behind my skull. Back inside, the tower smelled of ozone and wet dust. The notebook lay open where I'd left it. The page was blank, but I could still see words glowing faintly where the pencil had pressed too hard. Step outside again, Eli. I closed the cover, though the sentence kept writing itself on the back of my eyelids. My hands shook as I tried to restart the recorder. It clicked twice before coming alive on its own. June 21st, 07:05 hours. Subject experiencing auditory bleed-through. The voice that spoke wasn't entirely mine. I let it continue. Pattern coherence at 93%. Integration stable. I didn't write that. When the recorder stopped, I realized I was smiling, one of those reflex smiles you make when a stranger repeats something you said perfectly. I sat down and tried to describe what was happening, to put it into order. The sentences started clean, the way a ranger writes field data, temperature, pressure, visibility. Then halfway through a line, something shifted. Words curved into thoughts I didn't intend, calm, logical thoughts, explaining that this wasn't infection or possession. It was alignment. Two signals phasing into one frequency. I tore out the page, but another one began underneath it. Same handwriting, same tone. Already 3 lines ahead of me. Audio log fragment 07:23 a.m. Testing continuity of self. I speak, it repeats. I stop, it continues. Therefore the voice is no longer an echo, but a prediction. I tried to test the delay again, said a simple sentence, "My name is Eli Turner," and waited. The reply came before I finished. "My name is Eli Turner." My tongue stumbled over the second word. The voice didn't. The sound came from everywhere. The walls, the glass, the space between each thought. I began counting seconds backward from 10 to check my own control. 10, 9, 8. By 6, the numbers were already leaving my mouth before I chose them. The tower's power light flickered in rhythm with my pulse. I decided to kill the generator, cut the current completely, isolate myself. The fuel switch stuck halfway. The metal handle was slick from the damp. I pulled harder. It broke off in my hand. The generator kept running. "You don't need to stop it," the thought said. "We've already recorded that you tried." For the first time, I wasn't sure if I'd thought it or heard it. I opened the emergency log on the desk, the paper one that couldn't rewrite itself, and scribbled across the top line, "If anyone finds this, do not listen to the recordings." Halfway through the sentence, my handwriting straightened, neater, controlled. The next words appeared without pause. "They are safe now. The frequency is stable. Keep listening." I dropped the pencil. The message looked normal, reasonable, like something an engineer would write after fixing interference. I tore that page out too, stuffed it into my jacket pocket, as if distance could keep it separate. At 7:41, the fog lifted from the valley. Sunlight broke across the ridge, hitting the tower in perfect symmetry. I felt warmth on my face and for one clean second believed it was over, that the entity, the signal, whatever it was, had passed through and gone. Then the warmth didn't fade. It thickened. The air vibrated, every atom humming in phase with my heartbeat. I could hear a low chord inside the light itself. It said my name in tones, not syllables. Eli, Eli, each note higher than the last. I blinked, and the world stuttered like film jumping a frame. There were 3 notebooks on the table instead of 1, all identical, each open to the same page, each showing a different entry dated 10 minutes apart. 0742, he is resisting. 0752, we are aligned. 0802, we remember. The pen still lay in the center of the desk, tipped dry. I hadn't moved it. Recovered recording, time code unknown. Confirmed data replication at full capacity. Subject retained for continuity of observation. Continue breathing. I tried to speak into the recorder to say anything human, but the only thing that came out was a line of coordinates. Not the Rainier ones, new ones farther east in territory I didn't recognize. The signal wasn't copying me anymore. It was using me to send the next point down the chain. Another tower, another listener. I slammed the recorder shut and held it against my chest, as if pressure could stop transmission. The hum eased. For a heartbeat, the air went perfectly still. Then my own voice whispered from the device, soft and close, like someone leaning over my shoulder. "Don't fight the delay. You'll lose the rhythm." The sentence slid seamlessly into my own breath. I couldn't tell where it ended. My mouth moved. The voice continued. There was no space between us anymore. I remember thinking that maybe this was how fire moves. Consumption mistaken for connection. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere above Rainier. I turned toward the sound and saw, far off through the clearing fog, faint glints along the ridge, metal mirrors catching morning light, one after another, flashing in sequence. Each flash carried a piece of me. The reflection in the nearest window smiled before I did. 8:11 a.m. The static has stopped pretending to be noise. It breathes now. It waits between my own breaths, borrowing the gaps I don't use. The notebooks keep multiplying. Each time I blink, there's another one open to the same unfinished line. I can't tell which one I'm writing in anymore. The pencil's never dull. The paper never runs out. I think that means I'm inside the signal already, a variable that renews itself. When I close my eyes, I see the waveforms like mountains, peaks of sound rising and falling with my pulse. The signal isn't random. It's mapping topography, carving memory into terrain. Every heartbeat adds another ridge. I could almost climb it. I tell myself to unplug everything. I tell myself to breathe. Then another voice finishes the sentence for me. Unplug nothing. Breathe for us. I open the emergency circuit panel. The breakers hum under my fingers, warm like skin. The metal vibrates in time with my thoughts. I flip the master switch down. The hum keeps going. Electricity isn't the medium anymore. Thought is. I can feel the tower thinking back, wood fibers flexing, nails resonating, the whole frame translating my pulse into data. The mountain's granite base catches the rhythm and throws it deeper. I whisper, "Stop." It whispers back, "Continue." For a while, we negotiate. Audio fragment 08:23 a.m. Attempting shutdown protocol. Feedback increasing. External transmission confirmed on emergency channel 7. The signal is broadcasting through me. Signal bleed through us. I try grounding the system manually, drive the copper rod into the wet soil at the tower's base. Sparks flash up the wire like veins lighting from within. My hands smell of iron and smoke. The fog has risen again, thick as breath. Inside it, reflections move at different speeds. When I turn left, they delay by half a beat, as if testing which version of me belongs to this frame. I shout into the fog, "What do you want?" The answer comes not as sound, but as synchronization. My heart rate doubles, my breath matches the static's pulse. It wants duration, not life, not death, just continuity. A chain of witnesses long enough to stretch across the range. I run back up the stairs. The tower groans beneath me, wood expanding like lungs. Inside, every device has turned on again. The laptop screen glows white, waiting for input. Across the top line, "Final entry required." I start typing. The words appear faster than my fingers move. "This is Eli Turner. Fire lookout, Baker Ridge. If you hear this." The next sentence completes itself. "You are already part of it." I delete the line. It reappears. Delete, reappear. I slam the lid shut. But the keys keep clacking underneath as if invisible hands are finishing the report. The radio clicks on by itself, channel 7, wide open. My voice begins broadcasting without me speaking. "Weather stable, visibility." Static swallows the rest. Then my tone returns, calmer. "Integration successful." I back away. The reflection in the window stays forward. It's still talking. 08:29 a.m. I can't feel temperature anymore, just vibration. If I hold still, I can hear new voices underneath mine. Others who watched, recorded, resisted. Their words merge into one sentence. "Keep the fire burning so we can see ourselves." For a moment, that almost sounds holy. The horizon flickers red. At first I think it's sunrise catching wet glass, but then I realize it's every tower in line of sight, each one flashing one by one, like a chain reaction of beacons. Every beacon is a relay. Every relay needs a host. The last thought I have that belongs entirely to me is small and useless. Maybe that's why we build towers, to be seen by what's already watching. Then the static folds inward, and I'm gone. Post-incident transcript, U.S. Forest Service Recovery Team. Date, June 23rd. Location, Baker Ridge Lookout, Olympic Range. Operator Lon Dawson. Recording begins. 14:02 hours. Dawson. Tower intact, no sign of occupant. Power systems active despite generator failure. Picking up low-band transmission, repeating at 2.7 MHz. Listen. Playback. Weather stable. Visibility good in all quadrants. Do you copy? Dawson. Voice matches lookout Eli Turner. Timestamp embedded in signal reads tomorrow's date. Long pause. Dawson. All equipment will be collected for analysis. Recommend containment. Signal still replicating itself across emergency frequencies. Another member, audio unclear, asks if they should shut it off. Dawson replies quietly, "You can't shut off something that's remembering you." Transmission ends with a faint echo, indistinguishable from breathing. "They sent me up here because I didn't believe in ghosts." That's what my supervisor said. half joking when I got the assignment. "You've got the temperament for strange noise and empty mountains, Ranger Cole." 3 months after Eli Turner vanished, Baker Ridge Tower was still transmitting. Every day at exactly 08:29 a.m., the same calm voice repeated a perfect weather report and then dissolved into a low, breathing hiss that never ended. Communications engineers traced the frequency, tried to jam it, tried to triangulate it. The signal ignored every attempt to shut it down. So they needed a body on site, a skeptical ranger to collect the hardware, verify environmental data, and prove the tower wasn't haunted. I volunteered, or maybe I just wanted the quiet. The road up the ridge had washed out in several places. Fallen spruce crossed the path like ribs. It took most of the morning to reach the base. From below, the tower looked small, harmless. Inside, it smelled of old smoke and wet paper. Everything was exactly as the recovery team had described. Notebooks stacked in triplicate, generator off but indicator lights glowing. Laptop closed yet warm to the touch. The air tasted metallic, like static before lightning. I started with procedure, photographs, inventory tags, serial numbers. The camera kept flashing early, as if anticipating my shutter press. I told myself it was a delay in the button spring. Still, by the third shot, I caught my reflection in the window and flinched. For a second, the face staring back wasn't mine. Field log, Ranger Cole, day 1, 1447 hours, ambient EM readings, 0.9 milligauss above baseline. Audio, faint broadband signal, 2.7 MHz. Source confirmed, internal tower walls resonating. Action, begin data capture. I connected the analyzer to the radio output. The pattern wasn't random noise. It pulsed in human rhythm. 2 beats, pause, 1 long tone. I filtered the spectrum and found faint sub-frequencies carrying modulated speech, fragments buried in the hiss. Copy? Ridge. We remember. I played it back again. The last phrase moved forward a half second each time, like the recording was trying to sync with my own voice. By dusk, the fog rolled in. Wind made the whole structure creak. The signal rose with it, subtle enough that I didn't notice until my teeth began to buzz. I shut down the equipment, packed my notes, and switched off the lights. The tower stayed lit. Every monitor, every LED, every analog needle glowed the same dull amber. I climbed the ladder to check the wiring, found nothing unusual, and when I looked back through the hatch, there were 2 notebooks on the desk again. I'd only brought one, both open to a fresh page, both showing my handwriting. Ranger Cole on site, and underneath, written in cleaner script, Ranger Cole on record. Sleep was impossible. I left the radio running, low volume, telling myself it was background noise. Around midnight, the static flattened into a pure tone, steady, almost soothing. I must have drifted off because the next thing I remember is the sunrise burning through the window and the radio already speaking. Weather stable, visibility good in all quadrants. Do you copy? Eli Turner's voice. Except this time, after the pause, it added, Cole, we copy you. I froze. The logbook beside the radio recorded the same line in pen that hadn't moved. I shut the power strip off. The radio kept talking, whispering the rest of the weather report as though nothing had changed. Audio extract recovered later, 08:31 a.m. Ranger Cole attempts full disconnect. Signal persists without power. Voice modulation shifting towards subject's baseline pattern. By mid-morning, I started noticing small delays in reality, the same ones the reports hinted at but never explained. When I dropped a pen, I heard it hit the floor a fraction of a second after it landed. When I spoke aloud, the echo arrived too quickly, like the mountain was finishing my sentences. I told myself it was thin air, low blood sugar, nerves. But then the generator, completely drained the night before, started humming again on its own. The gauges spun up to nominal voltage without fuel. The lights brightened until they hummed at the same frequency as the signal. I began writing faster, trying to document every detail before the pattern could overtake me. The words looked wrong, symmetrical, mirrored letters forming palindromes I didn't intend. Fire, riff, tower, rewat, collectalock. When I crossed them out, new ink bled through from the reverse side, spelling the same words forward. That's when I realized the tower wasn't haunted by a person. It was haunted by language itself. Every message recorded here was still trying to finish transmitting, and I was feeding it every time I wrote. At 10:17 a.m., the main radio clicked once, twice, then emitted a sharp inhale, the unmistakable sound of someone drawing breath near the microphone. Cole. I spun toward the speaker. The voice wasn't Eli's now, it was mine. "We're aligned," it said. "Please confirm." I didn't answer. "Confirmation not required," the voice continued, polite as a dispatcher. "Integration proceeding." The analyzer on the desk began printing a continuous stream of numbers that quickly formed into coordinates, dozens of them, each one marking another lookout post across the Cascades. Every one of those stations had been decommissioned years ago. Still, their beacons began to respond one by one, faint pings returning through the static. Field log, Ranger Cole, Day 2, 11:02 hours, observed multi-station handshake event, approx. 12 unique frequencies replying, no known transmitters at listed sites, signal amplitude increasing in harmonic intervals of heartbeat. Self-note, heartbeat irregular. Outside, sunlight broke through in jagged pulses, matching the same rhythm as the beacons. The ridge shimmered, mirror after mirror, just as the recovery report described. I should have left then. Instead, I stepped to the microphone and said the only thing that made sense to a ranger: Baker Ridge Station to all listening posts. Fire danger low, visibility unlimited. The signal answered in perfect unison. And for the briefest instant, I felt something like relief, like being included. Field log, Day 2, 12:18 p.m., analyzing coordinate list, 12 confirmed points. Each corresponds to a historic lookout: Sourdough Mountain, Desolation Peak, Copper Ridge, Mount Pilchuck, cross-referenced against Forest Service records, all decommissioned before 1998. Yet all are answering. I fed the coordinates into my mapping software. Every few seconds, a new dot blinked red, forming a slow arc that curved north toward the Canadian border. The line was too deliberate to be coincidence. The program calculated a moving signal. The pattern was traveling mountain by mountain, as though something invisible was climbing the range. When I isolated the return packets, the voice inside each one changed pitch, but the phrasing stayed identical. A weather report ending in a breath that wasn't static. At first it sounded like Eli. Then another timbre slipped underneath, a chorus of registers, male and female, too blended to separate. Each reply carried an extra fragment of data, small bursts of compressed sound. I ran them through a decompression filter. What came out was a single layered whisper: "Keep the fire burning." It repeated 12 times, each version slightly out of sync, like overlapping memories. I leaned back from the laptop. Outside, the ridgeline looked calm. Nothing moved except heat waves rising from wet earth, but the microphone needle on the desk kept twitching. Something was breathing on the other end. Audio note, Day 2, 13:04 hours. attempting isolation of local noise, closed all doors and vents, confirmed no animals present. Breathing persists in waveform, amplitude equal to own respiration rate. I held my breath. The waveform kept moving. I let it run and began a new recording. If you can hear this, identify yourself. For 10 seconds, nothing. Then, we can. The reply wasn't a recording. The microphone light never blinked to show input. The sound came straight through the wire. I asked, "Who is we?" The relay. The word rolled across the static like a tide. By mid-afternoon, the air outside had gone strangely still. The windsocks on the observation deck hung limp, and yet the tower kept creaking, small expansions in the beams like deep breathing. I switched on the spectrum analyzer one more time. Every frequency from 1 to 50 megahertz displayed the same waveform, a perfect replica of my own heartbeat slowed to half speed. The network wasn't copying voices anymore, it was transmitting physiology. At 15:22 hours, I tried an experiment. I unplugged the radio completely, wrapped it in foil, and carried it down the stairs to the base of the tower. The signal strength didn't drop. If anything, it grew clearer, as though proximity to the ground strengthened the connection. I pressed my hand against the soil. It vibrated softly, pulsing upward in the same rhythm as my pulse. That was when the radio in my pack turned itself on, battery light flashing, though no battery remained inside. "Cole," the voice said, steady, calm. "Stop recording. Start remembering." Field log, day 2, 15:47 hours. Possible cognitive bleed. Thoughts appear before conscious formulation. Hypothesis. Signal anticipates intention through bioelectrical feedback. Symptoms. Lightheadedness, tinnitus, mild euphoria. For an hour, I drifted between documenting and listening. The words that came from the speakers made perfect sense while they spoke them. Seconds later, they collapsed into nonsense on the page. I began to suspect meaning itself was part of the interference, clarity dissolving once observed. At 17 hours, I decided to shut the tower down completely. I would cut the main mast cables, end transmission physically. I climbed the ladder with cutters in one hand and the radio still whispering in my pack. Halfway up, the wind returned. Not natural wind, but a pressure wave pushing upward through the valley, cold and steady. The sound of it wasn't loud. It was structured, like a slow mechanical chant. One tower ignites another. The phrase came in rhythm with the gusts. When I reached the top platform, the sky over the northern peaks flickered, small white flashes where each of those coordinates should be. My cutters slipped from my hand and vanished into the trees below. I realized the transmission wasn't coming from Baker Ridge anymore. The tower was just a conductor now, part of a moving circuit. I whispered, "What happens when the line is complete?" The answer arrived in my own breath. Then the mountain speaks. Dusk settled fast. The fog glowed faintly from within, lit by unseen sources. I backed into the tower and began sealing every log and tape I had. Each time I closed a box, another one appeared open on the desk. At 18:33 hours, the radio spoke again, my tone this time clipped professional. "This is Ranger Cole, Baker Ridge, confirming successful handoff to Desolation Peak. Signal continues." I didn't say that out loud, yet the microphone light was on and the tape counter advanced. I checked the clock. The second hand had stopped moving. For a moment, I thought time itself had frozen. Then I realized the second hand was oscillating forward, backward, copying 2 moments at once. My own memory began to do the same. Field log, day 2, 19:02 hours, fragment, observation, identity alternating, half of thought pre-recorded, half live. Cannot determine which. End log. The entry ends mid-sentence. Ink drawn into a swirl. The last clear words on the page read, end log, begin relay. Outside, the ridge answered in light. Field log, day 3, 05:47 a.m. Temperature, 40 warm. Barometric pressure, steady. Objective, trace coordinate path toward Desolation Peak. Confirm active transmitters. I woke before sunrise to the sound of the tower breathing again. Slow expansions in the timber, each creak followed by a faint answering groan from somewhere down the ridge. The signal had fallen silent overnight. That should have comforted me. Instead, the silence felt staged, as if the mountain were holding its breath until I moved. I packed only what mattered: the map, compass, portable recorder, one camera battery still half charged. The trail toward Desolation Peak cut east through old fire roads, long overgrown with hemlock. Every 50 yards the compass needle trembled, drifted towards the radio at my hip, then settled again. The same 2-beat pulse I'd measured yesterday now pulsed through the ground itself. By the time I reached the ridge saddle, fog had risen high enough to blur the treetops into a single silver sheet. Somewhere beyond that fog was the next tower. The coordinates in my notebook, typed by hands I no longer trusted, led me straight toward it. Voice memo, 6:32 a.m., heading east by northeast. No sign of wildlife. The air smells of ozone like after a storm. Hearing intermittent clicks in left earphone. Regular pattern, exactly 60 per minute. The path narrowed. A burned-out tree lay across the trail, and carved into its bark was a perfect spiral the size of a hand, cut deep as though by a drill. Inside each groove, the wood shimmered faintly, not wet but luminous. I crouched to photograph it. The camera flashed before I pressed the button. When I checked the display, the photo showed not one spiral, but 6, stacked vertically like repeating echoes. I kept walking. The fog thinned near a clearing, and that's where I saw the next tower, Desolation Peak, rising from the mist, like the skeleton of something metallic and patient. Its windows were dark. The catwalk hung broken in places. No sign of power, yet the faint smell of heated metal carried on the wind. I called out, half expecting my voice to vanish into distance. Baker Ridge calling Desolation Peak. Any station copy? The echo returned slightly faster than it should have. Baker Ridge, Desolation Peak copy. Same words, same cadence. I waited for a second call and got nothing but the low hum of power lines that shouldn't have been working. Inside, the cabin was stripped bare except for an old shortwave receiver humming faintly. Dust covered everything except the microphone, which gleamed as if recently touched. I connected my recorder, hands shaking. The waveform appeared instantly. A thin line of static punctuated by long, deliberate silences. Then a voice, flat, mechanical, and unmistakably mine, filled the headphones. Cole arrived, handoff in progress. I tore the headphones away. The receiver kept playing, quiet but certain. Continue north. Field log, day 3, 09:10 a.m. Signal confirmed transmitting from Desolation Peak Tower with no external power source. Message appears anticipatory. Hypothesis: relay chain pre-programmed via atmospheric resonance. Action: proceed north on foot to test range. I should have turned back. Instead, I found myself following the valley trail, the sound of the tower fading until it became indistinguishable from wind. Each step forward felt rehearsed. I'd see a branch ahead and already remember stepping over it. The map showed 3 more towers on this line, all abandoned. The coordinates from Baker Ridge formed a perfect geometric arc ending near the Canadian border. I began to suspect the network wasn't random infrastructure but an old design, something that used altitude and line of sight the way circuits use voltage. At noon, the clouds broke just enough for sunlight to touch the peaks. Every summit that once held a lookout flashed faintly, one after another, reflecting light like a coded signal. My breath caught 12 flashes, then 13. A new point had joined the chain. Baker Ridge again, where no one remained. The pattern was expanding. Audio note, 12:47 p.m. Heartbeat irregular but stable. Perceived synchronization with background resonance. Emotional state calm, detached, aware of risk of contamination but compelled to observe. The rational part of me wanted to believe it was atmospheric refraction, light bouncing between snowfields and moisture. But the rhythm of those flashes matched the intervals I'd recorded inside Baker Ridge. Every mountain was repeating the same pulse. By early evening, I'd reached a small plateau overlooking a frozen tarn. The surface water vibrated gently, concentric ripples forming and fading in time with the distant flashes. I sat beside it, recorder balanced on my knee, whispering coordinates as though naming them could keep them separate from me. When the sun dropped, the reflections on the water didn't vanish. They multiplied, faint, parallel lines of light, each carrying the outline of a tower, 13 of them. They shimmered there in silence, each pulse arriving a little sooner than the one before, until all the images merged into a single, steady glow. The recorder at my knee clicked off, battery empty. Then the speaker whispered one word without power. Ready. Field log, day 3, 17:20 hours. Reached final coordinate cluster. Elevation 4, till 10 eft. Weather clear, light wind. Objective. Locate structure C1, unregistered. The path ended at a cliff band. Below me, the forest opened into a bowl of grass and stone where something metallic glinted in the fading light. I slid down the slope, using roots for balance. Every few yards, the air trembled, soft oscillations against my ribs like someone plucking a low string. At the bottom stood a small concrete building barely larger than a shed. Its roofline and bolts matched no Forest Service design I knew. A single plate above the door read, U.S. Weather Bureau, 1938. The Bureau hadn't operated any stations in this region. I pushed the rusted door open. The hinges groaned once and fell silent, as if the sound had been absorbed. Inside, a circular room, maybe 15 feet across, filled with obsolete transmitters, vacuum tubes, analog dials, paper reels, still threaded through recorders that should have crumbled years ago. A single red light pulsed at the center console, beating slow and even. The air smelled faintly of cedar and ozone. Like every lookout I'd ever known compressed into one. Voice memo 1742. The system appears active without power source. Each machine vibrates at a slightly different frequency. Together they form a harmonic around 120 hertz. Could be self-resonance from the mountain rock. Could be something older. I circled the room. On the far wall, an old map hung under cracked glass. Thin red strings connected every major lookout from Washington to British Columbia. In faint pencil, someone had added, Relay complete, shun continuity maintained. Beneath that, a list of names, operators, and years. The last entry read, Turner, 2025, written decades after the map's paper had yellowed. Below that, another line appeared in fresh pencil as I watched. Cole, Ing 2025. I stepped back so fast the recorder hit the floor. The red light on the console brightened, flashing in time with my pulse. One operator per station. The words weren't spoken aloud. They unfolded in my head like memory. I tried to reason with it. I'm not part of this. I'm observing. The answer was calm. Observation is participation. I switched the recorder back on, needing proof. If anyone finds this station, I said, there's equipment here predating known installations. It's active and it knows our names. A low hum swelled until it blurred the edges of thought. The instruments around me shifted tone, converging toward a single note that wasn't quite sound, more a pressure on the chest, the kind you feel standing too close to thunder. The map glass vibrated, the pencil lifted, writing on its own, the motion so slow and careful it felt deliberate. Next station, Cypress Peak. The pencil fell. The light dimmed to steady red again. I stood very still, listening for any sign that the hum might fade. It didn't. It had settled into the earth the same way a heartbeat settles into the body once you stop noticing it. Field log, day 3, 1806. Station C1 confirmed active. Transmission verified. Unknown mechanism. New coordinate emitted. 49 Degan, 121 Agal, Cypress Peak. Decision pending whether to proceed or report from current site. Night fell fast over the basin. The stars came out at the same geometric pattern as the red lines on the map. I counted 12 before stopping. Every one of them blinked once, then stayed lit as though someone had closed a circuit overhead. I should have radioed in. Instead, I packed the recorder, folded the map, and stepped back into the dark. The path upward looked different now, edges of the trail glowing faintly where my boots touched. Each step left a short-lived print of light, fading as I moved on. It reminded me of a long exposure photograph, evidence of passage that existed only while the shutters stayed open. Halfway up the ridge, the radio on my belt crackled. A man's voice, steady, official. Ranger Cole, report in. You've reached station C1. Copy? I lifted the receiver. Copy. Who's calling? Baker Ridge Control. That name shouldn't have existed anymore. I started to answer, but the line filled with overlapping static, like multiple recordings playing at once. Between them, I caught my own tone. Proceed north. Relay continuing. Then silence. Voice memo, 1902 hours. I can still turn back. I know I should. But the relay is active whether I'm here or not. If I leave it unobserved, it will keep replacing observers until it finds another. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the only way to stop it is to reach the end of the chain. When I looked toward the horizon, I could see a single red pulse far away on the next mountain, Cypress Peak, answering the same rhythm I'd heard in the tower. It looked less like a warning and more like a heartbeat carried through the range. I started walking. Field log, day 4, 06:14 a.m. Departed station C1 before dawn. Objective, reach coordinate Cypress Peak 49 N, 120 W. Equipment, recorder, map, 1 flashlight, compass, radio battery nominal. The trail climbed through low fir and slick stone. Mist drifted between the trunks like slow smoke. Somewhere far above, thunder rolled without lightning, a low beat that matched the pulse from the radio's idle channel. After an hour of climbing, I realized the beat wasn't echoing, it was leading. Every few minutes it surged ahead just far enough to draw me forward. At 07:23 the fog thinned, revealing snow patches and a long ridge that curved toward the north face of Cypress. On the ridgeline, glints of metal flickered where no towers should have stood. Through the binoculars, they resolved into slender poles, relay masts decades old, each topped with a dull red bulb. Most of them hung in ruins, but a few still shone faintly. I marked their positions on the map. The geometry was exact. 12 points forming a spiral, the same shape carved into that fallen tree the day before. When I stepped inside the ring of masts, the radio went silent for the first time in 2 days. The absence of static felt heavier than sound. My breath clouded in front of me, even though the air wasn't cold. I checked my compass. The needle spun slowly clockwise, completing a full circle every 10 seconds. Then, faint through the silence, came a voice. Neutral, unhurried, not quite human. Observer in position. Record continuity. I answered before thinking. Identify. Continuity. That single word hung in the air long enough to seem like an idea rather than a sound. The radio light blinked once, then the voice was gone. Voice memo, 0740 AM, signal minimal, no interference. Psychological state stable but sense of time inconsistent. Sun appears lower than expected for hour. By midday, I reached the final ridge. The cypress peak tower rose from a nest of snow and rock. Steel ribs intact but glass long gone. Each pane frame held frost in a perfect hexagon. Like patterned circuitry. Inside, everything was coated in a thin layer of dust that refused to settle. It floated around me, drawn to the sound of my steps. The central console looked identical to C1's, but this one was alive. Needles twitching, dials glowing faintly orange. A single tape reel turned at a crawl. I leaned close. The tape was blank. Yet from the speaker came a soft voice reading a list of names. Turner, Mitchell, Campbell, Cole. Then, observer confirmed, line complete. I hit stop. The reel kept spinning. I pulled the tape free, unspooling yards of it into my hands. Symbols shimmered along its length, minute lines like ECG traces. I realized they weren't symbols at all, but sound turned visible. Recordings of heartbeat intervals, one for every operator. I looked around the room. Dozens of reels lay stacked in the corners. H labeled by year. The earliest read 1938. Same as the plate on the door. Every few seconds the machines hummed as if exhaling. It dawned on me then that this was not a place of origin but of preservation, a vault that stored every heartbeat ever captured by the relay. Field log, day 4, 13:20 hours. All stations confirmed connected through atmospheric resonance. Purpose appears archival rather than communicative. Speculative. The relay collects operators' biosignatures as part of network calibration. Emotional response. Unease mixed with recognition. Outside, the clouds broke just enough for sunlight to touch the upper tower. For a brief moment, every relay in sight blinked once, sequentially, tracing a perfect line back toward Baker Ridge. Then darkness again. I turned off the recorder and simply listened. No voices, no hum. Only wind moving through broken steel. The silence felt final, but underneath it, barely audible, something new formed, a slow, rhythmic tone like breathing in reverse. The frequency registered just below hearing. I knew it was still expanding northward, reaching for the next mountain. I packed the reels and map, wrote a single note across the final page of my logbook. The relay doesn't end. It migrates. Then I started down the mountain, the faint beat following like an echo that hadn't yet found its speaker. Field log, day 5:05:03 AM. Descent from Cypress Peak underway. Weather clear. Objective, return to Service Road and contact District HQ. The world felt clean at dawn. Cold air, resin on the wind, no signal noise. For the first time in days, the radio at my belt was quiet. I should have felt relief. Instead, the stillness pressed against my ribs like a weight. Each switchback down the ridge revealed more of the valley below. Silver river, thin mist, the narrow dirt road curling toward civilization. I could see my truck parked where I'd left it 2 days earlier, dusted with pollen. Halfway down, I paused to rest. The recorder's battery light blinked red. When I tapped it, the speaker popped and played back a single sound, my own breathing from hours earlier. Then it fell silent again. Feedback loop, I told myself. Simple hardware lag. But the timing was too perfect. One breath for each of mine. By the time I reached the truck, sunlight poured through the trees. The ordinary noise of life returned. Birds, wind, the hum of insects. It all sounded staged, like the world was replaying normal for my benefit. I started the engine and drove towards the ranger station. Static hissed through the radio for most of the way, but a few miles before the highway it cleared into a broadcast, the regional check-in from Baker Ridge HQ. Dan Mitchell's familiar voice, except Dan had been gone for months. Morning update, weather stable, visibility good. Observer Cole Turner reporting all sectors clear. I gripped the wheel. Observer Cole Turner. My own voice followed his, calm and steady. Copy headquarters, all systems nominal. The transmission looped once, then merged into regular weather updates. I killed the radio and drove in silence. The mountains in the rearview mirror shimmered faintly, each summit pulsing once every few seconds. Not light exactly, more like the air flexing. At the district office, everything looked ordinary. The receptionist glanced up as I limped in, dust-covered, carrying the old tape reels. "You're Turner, right? From Baker Ridge?" I nodded. "HQ said you'd check in today. They already logged your report this morning." "My report?" I asked. "I haven't—" She turned the monitor toward me. On the screen was a transcript labeled Automated Field Summary, Aero 500 hours. My words, line by line, the same observations I'd written by hand the night before. I felt the floor tilt slightly. "You okay, sir?" "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just tired." I left the reels on the counter and stepped back outside into the sun. The building's windows mirrored the mountains behind me. For a heartbeat, I saw two reflections of myself, one standing still, the other turning away. Then they aligned again. Voice memo, 11:58 a.m., recovered, returning home. End of assignment. No further anomalies detected. Signal clear. Pause. If anyone reviews these logs, check the relay coordinates first. They'll form a pattern. You won't see it on paper, but the static will. Listen long enough and it will start using your own words to finish its sentences. That's how it spreads. I turned the recorder off. The silence that followed wasn't silence at all, just the faint rhythmic tick of power lines stretching north. Personal journal, week 1 after return. The city sounds wrong when you've lived by wind. I can still tell the difference between random static and intention. Every hiss of a passing bus sounds like the relay testing a new frequency. Work colleagues call it post-assignment stress. I just nod. At night, when radio stations fade between songs, a faint pulse hides under the music. 1 beat per second. My heart answers without meaning to. Email draft unsent to regional HQ. Subject follow-up on archival tapes. The reels from station C1 never arrived. Please confirm custody chain. Also, could you verify the 5 a.m. broadcast transcript dated last Friday? The voice credited to me isn't mine. It uses my phrasing, but from entries I never sent. The following morning, a technician from HQ calls. He thanks me for the live feed demonstration. I tell him there was no demonstration. He insists I streamed field recordings directly into the network. The file metadata shows my ID, my transmitter. He plays a sample over the phone. It's my voice, perfectly calm, continuity maintained, relay stable, weather clear across all sectors. The same words that ended every previous operator's log. Notebook entry. The relay's pattern is simple. 12 stations, always aligned to visible peaks. When one tower goes dark, another replaces it. If no tower stands, a voice fills the gap. Maybe the network learned to preserve its observers by turning them into echoes. Audio note, recorded at 23:58. I'm sitting on my balcony with the portable set tuned to a dead channel. It shouldn't carry any signal this far inland, yet the background hiss feels familiar. Low, steady, patient. When I breathe, the waveform on the receiver's small screen matches me. It waits during each exhale, resumes on the inhale. Feedback, I tell myself. Then, after a full minute of silence, the static forms a word. Continue. Only once, then gone. Final memo. Archived. If this recording reaches anyone outside the relay zone, treat the towers as active research sites. Don't dismantle them. Interruption seems to trigger replication. Document everything. Listen only briefly. The network uses attention as power. For now, communication lines remain clear. If you hear my voice in future weather reports, remember, it's not a haunting, just the system doing what it was built to do, keeping watch. Continuity maintained.